Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the penultimate episode of Autumn Dialogues 9 Days, 9 Conversations, brought to you by WICCI and LIGHTHOUSE. Today's conversation is about ecosystems. Huh? Wondering what mentoring and soft skills have to do with ecosystems? Well, whatever we learn through mentoring or developing soft skills, our ecosystems actually determine how well we will be able to apply that. Even with all the skills in our arsenal, whether we are enabled or deterred to utilize them effectively is in a large part determined by the ecosystems we comprise. It is a two-way street. While our ecosystems enable or deter us, ultimately, we are also determinants of how our ecosystems are built. So, the connections are plenty. There are many topics within this sphere to discuss. For today, we bring to you a conversation around the role of ecosystems in the lives of the youth of our times. What are the ecosystems in which the youth operate like? How the youth operate within them? And what the youth want from their ecosystems and what the youth can do for their ecosystems. Joining me in this conversation are Siobhan Peters, Udita Chaturvedi, Nidhi Shukla, and I, Devna Chaturvedi, hereby open the dialogue on what our young citizens demand. And let's head over first all the way across the globe to UK and hear from Siobhan. Siobhan is a substance misuse services contracts manager. She is involved in behavior change and coaching, corporate relationship building, and domestic abuse work with victims as well as perpetrators. She is joining us from Manchester, United Kingdom, and she's working to make the workplace accessible to all. Siobhan, tell us, what has your experience with the youth been like?
So I think there's we kind of like, maybe I say some of this as, somebody who's not young anymore, so therefore you kind of like have an opinion on what young people want. And one of the things that we sort of like thought about, particularly with the pandemic and everything recently, and we couldn't have young people in our services and we couldn't go into schools and do all the work that we would normally do because schools were closed down and we couldn't go into those. So we moved to like an online offer. So we were able to offer appointments by WhatsApp or WhatsApp call, over the phone, online, any of those options that we thought, as the people running services, this will be great because young people will love this because they're so sort of like so tech savvy, they're so good at all the technology and everything, that we thought that was like, that would, the young person side of it would be the easy bit. It would be encouraging the adults to use that technology to engage with us would be the difficult bit. And what we've learned is that at first young people were like, oh, okay, yeah, that's fine, because they know it, they understood it. We didn't have to go through any sort of like, this is how you use the technology, this is, because all that was already done. But then over a kind of few weeks, we found that the engagement of young people dropped off. They were less and less engaging. They were less and less picking up the phone. So we went back to young people and we said, why is this happening for you? And one of the things that they said was that they really missed that face-to-face contact. They missed the actual physical being in a room with another person, that they didn't get. It was harder to get when you're on a call like this. You're picking only up, you can only see me from here upwards, and so you've got none of my other body language, whether I'm sitting in an open position and things like that. So they were saying that they found that difficult because they didn't have those body language sort of like cues to pick up on, and also that they didn't have privacy. And that was the main thing, that when we normally see young people and they come into our buildings or we go into their schools, we're in a room on our own with the young people, so they can talk quite freely and quite openly about what's going on in their lives and where they're up to. But when you're at home all the time, like in the pandemic, that you share a room with your brother, or you're trying to do your schoolwork from the kitchen table and your mum's in the kitchen cooking tea, and so there's no privacy. A lot of our young people, particularly inner city young people in Manchester and Liverpool, live in flats and apartments, so they don't even have an outside space where they could go. It's not as if they could go into the garden and talk to people. So I think one of the things that I've kind of like learned more, I mean, I've worked with young people for a really long time, but one of the things that we've learned recently is that I think services and the people who are providing sort of like ecosystems and things take for granted that young people will automatically love something just because it's online and it's technical. And what young people still want is some sort of like human contact, and they still want to have that sort of like face to face. And that we assume that privacy is not as much as an issue as it's turned out to be. So I think for me, one of the sort of like big learnings is that organisations tend to be run not by young people, they tend to be run by older people. And we as older people make assumptions about what accessible to young people looks like, and we're not always right about that. And therefore what we should be doing is we should turn that around, and we should go to young people first and say, okay, how can we make this accessible for you? How can we do this? Rather than us thinking we know something that turns out we don't know it that well. And we also, in terms of when we do work with young people in schools, they're in a peer group as well. So they've got the support of their peers within that group. Whereas when you take them out of that peer group, they're quite isolated and quite alone, and you've taken the support network away, which is, one, not good for young people's mental health, but they're more inclined to talk about something because when we work with young people, whether we work with them in schools, colleges, whether we've got young people in the workplace when we have students in workplaces and things like that, they're only with us for a really short space of time. The rest of the time they're on their own, and that's when their peer networks come into play, isn't it? And that's when they have that sort of like peer support, which we hit that age really between about 13 and sort of like early 20s. Your peer support group is way more important to you than anybody else. All young people think parents know nothing, don't they, until they get a bit older and they realise, actually, we do know a thing or two. But you go through that period, don't you? And it's your peers that you really rely on. And when we take away those sort of like ecosystems, when we close down schools, when we close down colleges, we can do the learning side of things. We can do all the education side and everything like that online. But we've actually taken away that physical peer-to-peer support that it's important to all of us, but it's crucially important to young people.
So true, Siobhan. I mean, the initial days of the lockdown, I remember even my reaction was, finally we get to stay home. We don't have to travel to college every day. And, the digital transformation that we've been waiting for so long is finally here. And that was the attitude. But now, I mean, honestly, as time has progressed, you miss that human interaction. You miss being able to sit together and have meaningless conversations without any judgment. In between classes, that's the kind of thing that we used to do. And there are so many ideas that have actually come out of those conversations, which are now just lost because, I mean, you won't call somebody to just talk about nothing at all, but you would do that if you were just face to face sitting idle, just between classes. That's truly a missed opportunity, and I also feel that. We also discussed something very interesting, and that's how ecosystems enable people to utilize their skills in the domain that they wish to. And that's something that's been somewhat of a challenge with rural India, where there seems to be an abundance of talent and an abundance of willingness to learn, but somehow the existing ecosystem has somewhere not met the mark when it comes to enabling the potential there. For that, I'd like to speak to Udita, and I'd like to give the stage over to Udita. Let me just introduce you briefly before we turn to you. Udita is a former journalist who now works as a research and communications professional in the non-profit sector. At present, she is working with a non-profit organization called Dasra in Mumbai. Her focus is on actionable but non-academic research for adolescents' well-being. Prior to that, she worked with Digital Empowerment Foundation in New Delhi for 4 years, where she led the communications department on issues of digital rights and digital inclusion. Recently, she also produced a podcast called Letters from the Lockdown in an effort towards building empathy and sharing strength with each other in these testing times. Udita, I'm truly eager to understand the perspective of the adolescents that you encounter through your work. Please tell us what are their aspirations, what are their hopes and demands from their ecosystems.
Pick from what Shivan said earlier. When we as service providers or information providers or academicians go to younger people with information, we assume that we know what they want because we have a body of experience. However, one of the greater learnings that I've had through my work was to listen to them every time, every fresh batch, listen to what they want. I used to work with an organization and we were providing rural internet connectivity to them. And we had a curated computer learning course designed in Hindi and different regional languages so that they could understand better. And it was a very offline course so that because this was a course for people who did not understand computers at all, did not understand English. So how do you teach computers, which is primarily again an English language based device? Um, and then when we used to go there, we had like a set curriculum. We were teaching them how to use Google, YouTube, social media platform, Microsoft Office, and stuff like that. And in one location, I'm going to share two experiences which sort of just reiterate the point about how we need to listen to them rather than go with our own learning. We were in Bihar, and then we trained these women there. They were young married women in their early 20s and between 19 and 22 years old. We trained in computers. And we hope that they would come and learn some vocational skills at the center around craft and art that they could then sell and earn some sort of livelihood. They came from families where they weren't allowed to go to the computer classes. So every weekend, every weekday, when their husbands and father-in-laws would go to work, they would jump over the boundary wall to come to this computer center to learn. And they said, we've learned your course. Great. Thank you so much. But can we just come here and look up recipes? We don't want to do anything else. We just want to look up recipes, go back home and prepare really nice dishes. In another village in Uttar Pradesh, there's this young girl, 16-year-old, who was learning computers. And again, we went back with so many learnings. We had this curated course for them. And then what we didn't have was a detailed fashion designing course. And she came up to us and said, this is something that everybody's learning in this village. So this isn't competitive enough for me if I want to make a living or stand out in this crowd. Can you teach me a course which focus on fashion design? And we did tell her, we didn't go give her a fashion design course, but we helped her with tutorials that could then help her with those skills and she could apply. But again, it's very important to listen to the younger people. Every individual, every location, every region has its own unique demands and needs. A rural 18-year-old's demand could be very different from an 18-year-old in an urban setting. While your primary areas, health, livelihood, education are same, like they want to do well in those buckets, but the pathways for both of them are very different. And so there cannot be one unique pathway that you can apply to every state, every region, every language of India, given the diversity here. And that needs to be very well decided and laid out while listening to those young people.
Thank you, Udita, for bringing that out. I mean, truly, if people would just hear other people at times, I mean, this is something we've discussed in our other panels as well, like empathy and such. That sometimes it's just important to listen to the other people before acting on their behalf. So everybody who's acting on somebody's behalf, if they just listen to the people that they're acting on behalf of prior to taking any action, that'll just bring in so much of a difference, and that's so true. I mean, as you were speaking, I was just trying to remember when I was 18 years old and what my demands were like. Education was never a priority in that entire list. And that's just so unfortunate. I mean, speaking from a point of privilege here, complete privilege here, that education has never been a priority, skills have never been a priority. They've just happened because it's been in the natural course of things. But hearing these perspectives is something, and these perspectives do need to be brought forward more.
And also it came very easily for us. Like education, going to school was so taken for granted for us always, right? There was never a question that this won't be accessible for us. And coming from a professional background where I work with rural communities, these aren't routine. Like this, to be allowed to go to school is a challenge. And so education for them is not something that they can take for granted.
Just it's just so I mean, So enlightening to hear these perspectives, and just wish that these perspectives are brought forward in more conversations and more people talk about this. It The ecosystem also, I feel, somewhere needs to enable this discussion where people not only speak when they are affected by something, but they're also enabled to speak about things that affect others around them, others like them, others perhaps unlike them. And that's something that we can help with as we continue to develop our ecosystem. What do you think about that?
I think we have like what we class as service user forums, and we we do it quite readily in our adult services, to be honest. We go back to everything, and it's something that we have started to do more and more and more, and have really improved in the last probably 3 to 4 years with our young person services. So it's about kind of we have lots of tools like psychosocial tools that we use, with people with addictions. And then there was another set of tools that were kind of half badly designed for young people, and they were like, these are rubbish, these are like no good. And it was like, well, what do you want to see? And so we actually went through, we had something like 260 different sort of like tools and resources that we used, and we got a panel of young people together, and we went through them all. And lots of the ones that we thought were probably too adult were the ones that they really liked. And I think it's that. And so know that those are the tools that we use now, and we get less resistance now because those tools, we involved a group of young people and said, look, go through every single one of these, tell us what you think's good, tell us what you think's bad, tell us what you'd like to use, tell us what you wouldn't like to use. One of the things that they said they hated was when adults do that thing where they shorten words, like you say, are you happy? And adults write R, the letter R, and a U. And like the young people were like, are adults stupid? Can they not spell? And it was like, and I was going, adults think that you like that as young people. And the young people were going, no, I don't know why you think that. And it's kind of like, so we stopped doing all of that, or we stopped doing those because we talked to the young people, and they were kind of like, actually, that's quite patronizing when you do that. That's quite patronizing, and you want us to fit into your model, you want us to fit in your ecosystem, you want us to come in and join, but you're actually doing something that's patronizing and quite off-putting to us. So I think we are getting better in certain aspects at listening to young people. Schools, I don't know about in India, but in UK, I think schools are probably the worst people at all for listening to young people, because the schools work the education system because they've got to teach A, B, and C, and you've got to do this test and you've got to do that test. So there's less room for them to encourage young people to sort of like talk about what they need out of it. And I suppose is what you, going back to you saying, Davina, if you ask a young person, is education a priority? Probably not. So there are certain things where we have to accept, no, this has to happen, doesn't it? We have to go to school, we have to have an education. But on things around that, should we be looking to ask young people what they want more? Absolutely we should. Because if we at the moment, we're developing an awful lot of ecosystems from an adult perspective. And also the other thing is that the world wasn't the same when I was 18 as it is now. And even if you're 25 now, the world was not the same when you were 18. The world changes so quickly now. If you think for hundreds of years, it didn't change very much at all. But like now, the world changes so quickly. So you only have to be in your mid-20s and you're kind of out of touch with what it's like to be 17 or 18. So we need to really kind of like catch up onto that and not think, oh, well, I asked these people about this 5 years ago. Well, the experience of a 17-year-old now with the new technology, the new way of living is very, very different than it was to someone who was 17 5 years ago.
Between my brother and me, we have like an 8-year age gap. And sometimes my parents want to learn the lesson that they've learned with me and apply those when they are parenting my brother. I'm like, that doesn't work. There is a generation apart, like we are a generation apart, and sometimes I have to struggle to get to understand his generation better. And so for them who are like 20 years older to us, at least, if not more, that's even much of a struggle. And one, again, the difference between two childs still is so much more now than it was like a few years ago, probably with the advent of technology and the sort of access to information that we have.
So true.
Although, having said that, one thing that my grandma told me when I was very little, and this still applies today, about sort of like listening and talking and doing what we think is the right thing. My grandma always used to say to me, God gave you two ears and one mouth, which means you should listen twice as much as you speak. And I think, like, no matter how much the world changes, that's still true. We should be listening to what younger people are saying to us.
Truly, Siobhan, listening is just so important. I mean, we've talked about this in other panels as well, such as empathy. And yes, it does appear to be a universal philosophy because in this part of the world as well, I for sure heard it from my grandmom and my mom and my dad even that God's given you two ears and one mouth so that you will listen more. Taking this conversation now to a place where most of the listening has to be done by the youth themselves, and that's to a classroom. Um, we're moving towards an academician now, and that's Nidhi Shukla. Nidhi is an assistant professor at XISS Ranchi. Her research area is employment laws for working women. She is an educationist and is truly passionate about child rights. She's also passionate about inclusion. As an educator, Nidhi, you get to interact with the youth on practically a daily basis. And as an educator, you also get to shape the youth of this nation in some form. So please share your insights into your experience with the youth, the educated youth of this country, so to say.
So yeah, first thank you for giving me this opportunity, because though my research area is different and I have always expressed this aspect of mine where I am really passionate about children, child rights, and also as to what the ecosystem means for children, because they are one category of people who do not have a voice unless people like us make it, whatever we say becomes their voice. So that's very important. One aspect that is very important, and why I feel so passionate about it and so responsible towards them. This is one aspect, and then the other aspect is the ecosystem also. When we speak of the expectations people would have, and when we talk of children, even the children, they do have expectations which we are not possibly able to gauge or not possibly able to understand. So, though I am on a regular basis in contact with the youth, and they may be, for as far as my age is concerned, they are as good as children for me too. So, though they belong to a different age group, what I take them to be is a product of what they might have been right from the beginning, and as to what their expectations might have been right from the beginning when they stepped into this world, so to say. So it's not just, and when even when Udita spoke about the rural children or the rural education or whatever exposures the rural people could possibly have, it is all about being able to fulfill their expectations, and those expectations also have a certain kind of a context. So unless you are able to understand the different contexts, it is actually irrelevant as to how far you go with policies, and how far you go with framing them and making them a practical reality for those people. So speaking of these kind of expectations, I would also like to discuss to some extent the national education policy also, where I feel that I do have a lot of hopes from it, because as of now it is not yet implemented, but it is there in black and white, and it is already being framed and has actually given us an understanding of the kind of hopes that we might have, because it has a balanced view in terms of not just the curriculum, but also the vocational aspect, and also the extracurricular aspects which were missing in the earlier, whether you call it a policy or even the curriculum that we were speaking about. So I have had a certain kind of exposure also to being a part of workshops for children, or being a part of the policies. So that is again something that is very important from my understanding, that children do find some hope in the kind of ecosystem we are able to build for them. And then the other aspect is the psychological one, which also has a lot to do with the ecosystem. So it's not only about the tangible and the material aspects which we are able to, or even the infrastructural aspects that we are able to offer to them, whether they be children or the youth, or whichever stage of development they are in. So whatever we are able to offer to them with respect to the tangible and the infrastructural aspects, and also the psychological ones, because at a particular time, so we have seen the pre pandemic time, the pandemic, the period that we were affected by the pandemic, and there is going to be the post pandemic situation also, which will have to address all these aspects. So the expectations, like when the pandemic happened, and we spoke of children being introduced to online learning, and handling computers, mobile phones, and all these virtual, having the virtual space to their, having access to this virtual space, they were excited about it, isn't it? So there was a phase that they were excited about it, because that was a change that was brought about, because that is what they are looking for. Basically, children are looking for that kind of a change, that kind of a space where creativity happens, or it gives you the kind of experience that is different from what it had been. But over the months, again, it is something that they are missing, that they realize that they're missing out on certain things. So initially, when I spoke to certain children in the family, I came to know that they were, yes, they enjoyed the classes, but the the breaks that they got for utilizing it for something else, like having a break for a breakfast or something else, they utilize that break for talking to their classmates. So this is what became very important. That's something that we never realized that would be so important for them, and that is what Steoban said. The peer group is very important for them, and even for us, our students, the MBA, MBA graduates, also MBA students, even they find it very difficult to come to terms with this fact that they are not having their peers group around them, and the campus that they miss. It's actually that which needs to be addressed. Whatever at a particular time or in a particular context creates a gap in their expectations, that needs to be filled in so many different ways. So it is always going to be a different thing that we need to address, a different perception that we need to develop, and that will have to be evolutionary. That will have to be something that will have to be done with an open mind. You have to be receptive to the changes that are happening, and also be at that intellectual level where you are comfortable with the idea of changing your perception. So with our age group, it actually becomes difficult at times to understand that why change is so important for us, because we stick to our understanding of perceptions. So that is something that has been a great learning for me as an educator, or as even as a person who might be instrumental in framing certain decisions or policies for children. So that is some children and the youth, or whoever is at whatever stage of education. So that is as far as my understanding goes. Let's carry forward the discussion. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Nidhi, for that well thought out talk. I mean, it's so nice to hear somebody accept that, perhaps we don't have the full knowledge, and it would be good to um, evolve as we go ahead and work together in that process. It just fills my heart, and I just wish everybody thought like that. The world would be a much better place. It'll just be a much better ecosystem if everybody thought like that, in my opinion.
That's the whole idea. No, we need to make this world a better place for each and everyone. We have to create space for everyone. It cannot be that the people who decide will know what is it that decide for others, will definitely know what they actually need.
Yeah.
Yes, Regina.
The, um, this entire discussion has so far just been focused on what the young want and what the young demand, and that's what the topic demanded as well. But before we close, I want to balance it out a little bit and want to ask your opinion on what is it that the youth can do to make this ecosystem a better place. I'd just like you to take a few minutes and just share your views on what is it that the youth can do to enable a better ecosystem for the world that we live in. So, Siobhan, would you like to start us off?
I think that in my kind of, if you look at sort of like a lot of the sort of like youth movements around sort of like climate change and things like that, and you know, like Greta Thunberg and people like that are leading those things, I think that young people have got a much better focus on things like that than we have. I mean, you know, sometimes I kind of think, you know, are young people going to look back on my generation and go, how wasteful were you? You know, that you left us this awful world because you were so wasteful. You didn't look after our resources. You didn't look after, you know, our natural world. So I think that there are certain things that I learn off my children, and I learn off other young people, because they weren't a concept when I was young. So it's not something that I've grown up with. So I think for me, you know, there's a lot that young people have got to give. We as older people and adults have got to be prepared to hear that, and we've got to be prepared to listen to that, and we've got to be prepared to say, actually, you know, that is a little bit of an uncomfortable truth as well. And therefore, you know, I have played my part in that. I can't change what I've done, you know, about being wasteful of resources, but I can change from now on. So I think, you know, there's a lot that the young people can teach us. I think what young people can do is that, and this isn't always possible because you're young and you're enthusiastic and you want to get your message over, is, I think, and maybe this is something we can do, is to support young people to slow that message down a little bit sometimes, because I get that, you know, I get it. And, you know, they're going to have to inhabit this awful world for a lot longer than I am now. So they want it to be a decent place, don't they? I want it to be a decent place for my children and grandchildren. But when you're trying to convert a much older generation from habits, then I think, you know, young people have got a lot to teach those young people, but it's about how that message is put across. So, but on the other hand, the one thing I would say to young people to do is don't be discouraged, because sometimes it takes, you know, you need to knock at the door a few times, don't you, before you get an answer. So sometimes I think it is that kind of like, because what you're saying to adults is, particularly around those sort of, and that's like the biggest ecosystem there is, isn't it? The planet. This is what we've done to the world. This is what we've done to the planet. The thing that makes us all live and breathe. That, you know, for me, what young people can do is keep pushing that message, because you know, people will come on board, but you know, it doesn't happen overnight, does it? So I think, you know, in terms of like the biggest ecosystem we've got, I think that's where young people have got A, the most to offer, and B, the most to lose, because it's them who are inheriting that, isn't it?
So true. As with specialized environment and resource management, yes, it does resound with me as well. And I'll just like to add here, I mean, the reason I entered into an institution which offered that specialization, and in an economic subject, I could have gone to any other institution, but I chose to go to that institution because of my concerns for the environment. And then because I was at that institution, I got more knowledge and more hands-on experience as to what I can do about it, whereas there are other institutions that some of my friends went to who did not offer that sort of a training. So these are also some things that, you know, just that difference in the ecosystem that we've lived in determines how we react to the ecosystem, the larger ecosystem that we're talking about. So, you know, there needs to be some amount of seriousness that's paid to those aspects as well, which we are seeing. I mean, it's becoming a growing concern with each passing day. But then, yes, it's just not happening as quickly as it probably needs to.
Yeah.
Over to Udita, your thoughts on what our young people do.
I think thanks to social media, and both like online, offline platform, we're listening to a lot of individual youth voices. It'll be good to have more collective voices of them to be heard as well. At the same time, to what Shivan said, like they need to be a little more patient when communicating, because the older generation may tend to discredit what they're saying, or may have struggled to understand what they're saying. So they also need to be more patient in trying to help people understand what they are saying instead of hoping for immediate action. We do have, the younger generation does have shorter attention span, but when you want to communicate, I think patience is a very key point when you communicating. So that, and since Shravan already covered environment consciousness, and that is growing among the younger generation. What I would also like to see is there more much participation from them in local politics, and does not necessarily mean in terms of physical engagement and becoming a politician. I mean, that'd be good if we could get some younger politicians. But I see my younger cousins around me, my own brother also. Including me, we diss the politicians very easily. But then what are we doing to bring about that change? It's easy to diss, but every small step ends up making a big, like, every small drop ends up making a big ocean. So I think it's important for them to also start taking those conscious steps towards being politically woke, not just on social media, but outside as well.
Truly, I mean, there are so many occasions where I have tried to escape, not, I mean, just not sharing my political views just by calling myself an apolitical person. But deep down, I know where I stand. But I mean, it's just so true, something to be conscious about. I'm sure a lot of our listeners would also be thinking about these lines, and I hope they choose to act on it. I probably will begin acting on it now that you said it. Heading to you, Nidhi, what are your thoughts on what our young people can do?
Okay, a lot of it was Siobhan and Udita, they stole my words as far as the understanding of the youth as to what the youth can do. My experience has been on a totally different plane, Devina, so to be honest. Because whenever I have interacted, either whenever it has been with my children who are youngsters, 23 and 25 years of age, and even the students that I teach, I have always been on the plane where I have found myself at the receiving end in the sense that there are so many things that we have handled in a wrong way or have handed over to the next generation in such a bad shape that we are not competent enough actually to tell them how to go about things, because they I feel at most on most discourses and most of the discussions, they have a wiser understanding of this many a times. And even my children, or if you talk of marriage, or if you talk of children, if I talk of marriage, as to what is it the purpose, what is the purpose that it serves, that they question everything. If you speak of children, there are already so many that you have produced. Who's going to take care of them? Our generation is going to take care of them. So why do you all speak of those many things, that they are already so many problems that our generation has created for them with that they need to address. And I find them really very wise, and I find them very receptive to all that is happening around them. Whether you speak of politics, Devina, they do have viewpoints, and I find nothing wrong in even taking a wiser view of deciding for oneself as to when is it that I'm going to take it up as something that I need to respond to, or when is it that I'm going to go quiet on it, because I have a head in my place in its place which knows as to how it is going to be taken by other people, and how far other people are going to be wise enough to receive things that need to be said. So they are so conscious of all these aspects, whether it is the social aspect, whether it is the political aspect, whether it is the economic aspect. Youth knows where they have been placed by us, and my take is just let them be and allow them to be. They will definitely bring out a change. They already are. In fact, they already are. They need to, and that is what I have come to understand. As far as I'm concerned, there is a difference between interference and intervention. We need to understand that when it is required, intervene. If it is not required, just let them be. That's right.
Thank you so much, Nidhi. I mean, just as you were talking, there was an example that I was just thinking about just recently with this entire sale and big offers going on. I realized that my father had to purchase a new phone, so he relied on me to order it. But then I relied on my younger cousin to tell me which phone is the latest and which is the best one to purchase for him. That's just the circle of life, man. It's so true. I mean, he's much younger. He's still in school. He's probably entered class 10th now, but he's much wiser when it comes to what's the latest trend and what's the best thing to buy on the market. So.
I had just an example of, you know, when we were talking about young people being kind of patient. And a while ago, I kept, when I got a new laptop, I kept turning one of the screens off, and I didn't really know how I was turning it off. So, and I kept calling my son, and he kept putting it back on for me, and he was like this, and he put it back on like really quickly. And after it happened about the fourth time, I said to him, "Don't put it back on. Show me what you do to put it back on so that I can do it for myself." And he stood there for a minute and he went, "I can't slow it down enough for you." And that made me feel really old. But I think the thing was, it's that kind of like of like, when you're young and you get something and you understand something, it's hard to break that down for somebody who's not understanding to get it. And people mistake that in young people as that they don't have the knowledge. They absolutely have the knowledge. Like Nidhi was saying, they're very wise. They absolutely have the knowledge. They just have it so quickly and so at their fingertips that we can't always pick it up. So we should not mistake that for them not knowing, because they definitely do know.
Uh-huh. Thank you so much, Yovan. Makes me feel so good. With that, we call it a close for this day 8 of the 9 days autumn dialogues. I can't believe we're at our penultimate episode, and we've just got one more to go. That's tomorrow. So stay tuned, and we'll all see you tomorrow. Thank you.